Hello and welcome to this Anatomy by Drawing tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at the triangles of the neck. Now the triangles of the neck is one way of splitting the neck up into areas, and it's a really helpful way clinically of thinking where a patient with an injury in the neck, thinking about what structures may be damaged. So if we know the triangles, if we know how to split it up, and we know the contents of each triangle, we can then work out what structures could potentially be damaged. And this is quite a common exam question, so it's a useful thing to know. So we're going to start off our diagram of the triangles of the neck by drawing a square. So if you want to draw along with me. And this square is going to represent the left side of the neck, because anteriorly we're going to have the midline, and posteriorly we're going to have the trapezius muscle. Then the other two borders of this square are the mandible superiorly, and then inferiorly is the clavicle. So the first muscle which we're going to use to help delineate our triangles is the sternocleidomastoid muscle, and that will run from two heads, the sternal and the clavicular heads, up to the mastoid process of the temporal bone, but we'll just pop in one line here to represent the sternocleidomastoid muscle. And then to get the rest of our triangles, we just need to add in two muscles and one bone. So we'll add the bone in first of all, and that is the hyoid bone. And the hyoid bone is unique insofar as it doesn't have any other bony articulations, although it does have lots of very important ligaments and muscles which attach to it. So the next muscle we're going to add in is the digastric muscle, which has two bellies, an anterior and a posterior belly. And these two bellies, they don't actually quite meet the hyoid bone, but they're anchored to it by some ligamentous structures. So we'll draw it as if it meets the hyoid bone, because that's reasonable. So hyoid bone is there. And then, as we've mentioned, we've got the anterior belly of the digastric. I'm just going to write DG. And the posterior belly of the digastric. And then we have one more muscle to add in to complete our diagram, and that is the omohyoid muscle. And the omohyoid, like the digastric, has two bellies. It has a superior belly, of omohyoid, and an inferior belly of omohyoid. So we have sternocleidomastoid, anterior posterior belly of digastric, superior inferior belly of omohyoid, and the hyoid bone, and we now have all our triangles of the neck. So all of this anterior to the sternocleidomastoid forms the anterior triangle, which is then subdivided into four. All of this posterior to the sternocleidomastoid forms the posterior triangle, which is then subdivided into two. So we'll now name these triangles, and we'll start at the top with the one below the mandible, which is called the submandibular triangle, for obvious reasons, because it sits below the mandible, so the submandibular triangle. Then the one next to it we're going to call the submental triangle, because it sits adjacent to the mental symphysis of the mandible. And then anteriorly here we have the muscular triangle, and then the carotid triangle. And then we can split our posterior triangle into two, as we have done, and we're going to call this the subclavian triangle, and that's not because it is below the clavicle, rather it's because it contains the subclavian vessels, so the subclavian triangle. And then this one here is going to be the occipital triangle. Okay, so that is how we have partitioned the neck into triangles. And then we also said that it's important to know some of the structures which are found within each of these triangles, because then were someone to have a penetrating neck injury, you could work out what structures might get damaged. So we will now point out a few of the major structures which are found in each of these triangles, and we'll start with the carotids, and surprise, surprise, we're going to find the carotid artery. So the common carotid artery, which then bifurcates into internal and external within the carotid triangle. So common carotid artery. We also find the internal jugular vein. There is the hypoglossal nerve, cranial nerve 12. There is also the vagus nerve 10, and some nerves called the ansa cervicalis. So this isn't an exhaustive list, but it's hopefully should point out some of the major structures in each triangle. Okay, so what about the submandibular triangle? Well, we have the submandibular gland. We have the hypoglossal nerve as well. So it sort of comes down from the carotid and then goes up into the submandibular before diving underneath mylohyoid. We also have some lymph nodes. What about the submental triangle? Well, we have some lymph nodes there as well, and we also have some veins. And then in the muscular triangle, we'll have pharynx. We'll also have the thyroid gland, and with it, the parathyroid. And one of the important nerves in this structure is the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Okay, and then moving on to the posterior triangle, we'll start with the subclavian division of the posterior triangle, and here we will find the subclavian vessels and the brachial plexus. And then in the occipital triangle, we will have the external jugular vein, the spinal accessory nerve, which is cranial nerve 11, and emerging from just behind sternocleidomastoid, we get a number of nerves from the cervical plexus. So these are a number of sensory nerves which go to the head and neck region from the cervical plexus. So thank you for listening to this tutorial on triangles of the neck from Anatomy by Drawing. I hope you found it helpful. If you have, it would be great if you could like the video, subscribe, tell your friends about it. If you've got any questions or any ideas for upcoming videos, please pop it in the comments section. Thank you very much.